Hello?
Ladies and gentlemen, can I please have your attention?
Welcome aboard Frank's Magic Bus. For the next 2 hours, Frank Welch takes you on a musical journey with some of the best deep tracks in classic rock history. Now, without further ado, Frank Welch.
Our feature this time around in Frank's Magic Bus is Jethro Tull. Thick as a Brick Part 2, the sequel, as a matter of fact. And we're going to welcome back Ian Anderson here in a second. He's been here before in the Magic Bus. And we will talk about both the original Thick as a Brick back in 1972, early 72. It went to number 1 on the USA Billboard album charts. So how you doing?
Hi, Frank. Good to talk to you.
Good to talk to you. Last time we had you on here on Frank's Magic Bus, you had just put out the Aqualung Live thing a few years ago, so it's been a while. But now you've got the Thick as a Brick 2, and it's like 40 years after 1972, the original Thick as a Brick. And I briefly describe for our listeners who might not have been around or remember it like you and I do, the concept of the original Thick as a Brick. It was like a kind of a put-on where you kind of claimed a kid wrote the lyrics.
Yeah, it was the antidote really to the non-concept nature of the Aqualung album, which was often reviewed at the time in 1971 as being a concept album, and I always steadfastly said, no, it's just a collection of songs. It's just dressed up in an album cover and given a bit of a collective feel, but it's not really a concept album. It's just a collection of songs, 2 or 3 of which have something in common, but that's about it. So then the follow-up really had to be something that was was the other side of the fence, the kind of the antidote to the song collection idea. I thought, right, this is the opposite side of the coin. This is the mother of all concept albums, and we'll create this sort of parody, the spoof of our peer groups like Yes, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, the early Genesis, the King Crimsons of the day, and we'll do a concept album that is just a little bit of a dig, a little bit of a parody of the genre, And so I started off with the unlikely scenario of the lyrics having been written by an 8-year-old boy who had won a poetry competition, and the fictitious Gerald Bostock, the little lad, is the vehicle by which I bring us into a sequel that is not what happened next. It's what's happening 40 years on down the line. So through Gerald Bostock and the various possible characters that he might have grown up to become, it brings us into the present age, and for me, a kind of a snapshot of how most things in this era have changed so dramatically over the years. We've seen enormous change, obviously technologically, but of course in so many other ways too. And for that reason, I thought I can do a concept album again that's quite grandiose and large scale, but actually give it a relevance to the here and now, and not just be revisiting with some misguided nostalgia some heady days of 40 long years gone by.
Right. Well, I do remember when this thing came out back in 1972, and at that time, I'm thinking basically only Tommy by The Who in 1969 was really the only big concept album that I remember at that time. Why did the critics and so many people insist that Aqualung was a concept album? And wasn't it kind of risky to go ahead and say, I'm just going to spoof the whole thing and do a real concept album?
Well, it probably was risky, and but those were days when we took those kind of risks. We were certainly not dissuaded by record companies or agents or managers or promoters. Indeed, quite the opposite. I think the general feeling was that we were in an age of extraordinary creativity, probably most notably begun by the Beatles with Sgt. Pepper, but so many bands in the next few years had given such life to pop and rock music in a very creative way that record companies got used to the idea that, look, these young kids here, they're doing something that we don't necessarily understand it.
Well, those were the days of total freedom when you were making albums and you could do songs as long as you want. They could segue into each other. In fact, if I recall, Thick as a Brick really, it technically was one long song, right? But it had, it slowed down into different parts, right?
Yes, it was episodic. It took certain themes and reiterated, developed them, and just as obviously I've done with the new album today, you write it in perhaps more of a symphonic fashion, where you use the tools of the composer's trade. I mean, there's no reason to be ashamed or afraid of presenting a slightly more intellectual approach towards writing music. Someone's got to do it, and I rather fancy that those of us who've perhaps done that in the past can still do that and lend to it some authority and experience that makes it, well, for me as a writer and performer, is very worthwhile doing. I'm not under any illusion that everybody's going to love it. I think I'm quite realistic in assuming that it'll have some partial success.
Oh, absolutely. But now I've listened to this whole album, Thick as a Brick, too. My favorite track is track 5, Banker Bets, Banker Wins. Now, there's a line in there about a latte and a Starbucks muffin. So this really isn't a throwback to 72. You do have to update the pop culture references, and you have right there, right?
Yeah, and I've done that as well in the live show, trying to bring elements into the live performance of this. I mean, not that we've played it yet, but we're currently hard at work finishing off all the editing of various audio-visual bits and pieces and the theatrical, not script, but what I call the show Bible, which is an ever-changing, lengthy document that gets sent out to band and crew alike every 3 or 4 days with the latest amendments and additions and detail in terms of cues and elements of the show that I've written into it. And so it is a presentation. It is something that I think has an up-to-date feel about it, and I'm trying to make, what I'm trying to do is to use the musical palette of what we did in 72. So it's the Hammond organ, it's the rotating Leslie speakers, it's the Gibson Les Paul guitar, it's the Fender jazz bass, it's the glockenspiel, the flute, the little acoustic parlor guitar. It's the same feel, the same very present feel of real instruments played by real people. But in other ways, I've got to set this in today's world, for it to work for me, because I'm still, in spite of rumors to the contrary, alive and kicking and reasonably adept at keeping up to date with both technological change as well as the general cultural shift in society. So I feel very at home with this, but I have to make these little references to the origins of this music, and indeed to the origins of little Gerald Bostock as he went through life to be the various things that he might have become today. But that in itself, that just becomes a metaphor for the lives of all of us. We go through these profound moments, these pivotal moments where we make decisions or react to chance intervention in a way that definitely really shapes the rest of our lives. And I'm sure all of us over the age of 40 or 50 can look back and remember probably 3, 5, 7, 10 crucial moments when we know we, dictated by our reaction to something or our choice, we definitely will have shaped the rest of our lives. And it's a message to people not in their 50s, but in their mid-teens perhaps, that now is the time to start thinking very seriously about these life-changing moments that are going to occur to you. And you've got to make knowledgeable, thoughtful, disciplined decisions for yourself. Parents aren't going to do it for you, and you shouldn't let them. Neither should you react to peer group pressure from your buddies who will try and push you down convenient routes. You have to start thinking for yourself. And that's the message. This is an album for people who are 16 or 60, and that's what I've tried to write, and probably disastrously failed in both of those objectives, but at least I've had fun doing it.
Well, I'd say I like the hot and cold, if you will, a musical feel of the album. It rocks out, in some places, then it slows down really nice, okay, but that's what a lot of Jethro Tull albums have been like. When do you kick off this tour, and where?
Well, we start off in the Highlands of Scotland, in Perth, a small highland town where we've played a few times in the last few years, and that's a place to try to avoid Perth on the 14th of April, because we're going to be there and the sound of the train wreck on stage is going to reverberate right across the borders into England. It's going to be a very tough first show. I think the people who bought tickets for it are buying them on purpose.
You think so? Really?
They want to see me utterly humiliated on stage as the musical cacophony.
Results. So Perth is going to be a shakedown cruise through this one, huh?
Well, you could be a little bit more on the button by saying the entire UK tour is a shakedown. Hi, this is Ian Anderson of Jethro Tull, and you're rocking out with Frank Welch on the Magic Bus.